topic. So the topic of the day is not just introducing the profile. I wanted to make an interpretation through these indicators of intergenerational equity. So the first one is really simple. It's an inter-age indicator. You compare what an age group gets per capita with what another age group gets per capita too. Okay, so it's really between age groups, not between generations. The second one is really simple too. It's an intergenerational indicator. So you compare, for example, the consumption of successive generations per capita at the same age, okay? And so you have your cohort per capita, and if, for example, your consumption increases from one generation to another at the same age, okay, we can discuss a lot about that, but you can say that it's kind of intergenerational equity, right? The third one is a bit more complicated. It's an inter-age and intergenerational indicator that we apply in a paper in the Journal of the Economics of Aging on another topic for France. And what you do is you take what a person age A at time t gets in consumption, and you compare it with the average per capita consumption by age, but unweighted by population, right? And we can discuss a lot about how to do that, right? And we did it between 0 and so the entire population. So, and what you want to analyze is the evolution of this indicator for one cohort over time. And if a cohort for this indicator is over all the other cohort, it means that you keep the best position over time compared to other cohorts. This indicator is a bit complicated, I know that. So I go directly to the result because I wanted to present too many things, so I have to do it really quickly. So I go directly to the second indicator for labor income. I will only use this indicator for labor income, and for consumption I will use the three indicators. So this is a per capita age profile of labor income, per capita, yeah. And we have it for Canada here, for US, and for France. And what is interesting is first, labor income, if you look at cohorts and you compare them at the same age, so you have to look at lines, okay, vertical lines. You see that consumption increases or stagnates from one cohort to another over time. So there is no, let's say, break between generation relatively to this indicator. But there is an interesting fact here, and we have it for Canada, we have it for US, and we have it for France. Labor income of cohort 1950, and you know that very well, Hippolyte, and 1960 remain the same over time. So, and you find it for the three countries, it's exactly the same effect. And you find it in the countries, and you find exactly the same in provinces. So this is the same per capita age profile for my 5 regions, okay? And when you look at generation 1950 and 1960, it stagnates over time. But it's not the most important story. The most important story is that labor income increases or stagnate at least in any province, okay? There is no decrease of labor income. Okay, so the issue is that you have this cohort effect for labor income between 1950 and 1960, and do we have the same for consumption? Does it have an impact on consumption? And what is that? It's the first indicator. So we compare what an age group gets, so here it's 60 and plus per capita, with what people age 30 and 59 consume over time. And we do it, we compare old people with young people, just to talk really quickly, on the right side. So unfortunately, we are unable to do it since 1998 for Canada. US and France is really better than us. And what here, it's really interesting here, if you look at this ratio, for US and for France, you have an increase of what all people get on average compared to what people get when they are on the labor market on average per capita, right? But we don't find it for Canada. It remains constant. Okay, we have only 16 years, but it remains constant over time, right? And we have quite the same effect on the right side. It's even a slight decrease for when we compare old people with young people. So, what about the second? No, sorry. And for provinces, it's okay. It's a zoom. Okay, here it's the ordinate is 1 to 1.5. So it seems to be really hard, but in fact, when it's not that hard. And it's I could say many things about that, but on the whole, it seems to be quite the same, quite constant in all provinces, even if it's not exactly the fact, right?
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Maybe I wasn't paying attention, but in the previous slide, what is the reason for the gap in the US curve? Maybe you.
I think it's a previous data that they use, right?
Yeah, I made a mistake in 2004 and 2005, and I haven't fixed it yet. So it'll be filled in someday.
The curve is somewhere in between.
Yes.
So what about the second indicator? So where we compare cohort per capita over time, and we want to know if the consumption increased from one generation to another at the same age. So what we found, and we did it for France, we did a paper about that. It increases from one generation. It's not that clear, but when you make a zoom, it's very clear. It increases from one generation to another at the same age. When you look at per capita consumption, you have the same in US and even the same in Canada. So the cohort effect that we get between the cohort 1950 and 1960 doesn't result in the same for consumption because of reallocation. So that's the next step we have to do now. And we had exactly the same for provinces. So it means that the federal state is able to provide some intergenerational equity for each province, right? And okay, this is a complicated indicator now. This is the third one. So what do we do here? So we take a person age A at time t, and we divide it by the unweighted per capita consumption of each age group. And we want to analyze how it evolves over time. So for example, for cohort 1950, you can, it's not so clear. For cohort 2000, you can follow the evolution of this ratio, of this indicator, sorry, over time. And there is a problem only if one cohort is over the other cohorts for the entire life cycle. Here we have only 16 years for Canada, right? And what we had in France and in US is that we still have this gap for between 1950 and 1960. So it means that the cohort born in 1950 had a better relative, it's really difficult to interpret it, right? Even for me, a better relative position compared to the cohort 1960 for the 5 minutes, right? Okay, I'm done, it's all right. And it's not really good for Canada because we have it only from 98. We see that there is a little gap here, but we are not able to say if it's the same before. But it seems that the gap is not that huge in Canada. If we can conclude about that, right? It's not so easy. So, and I will finish with this one. And what is interesting here, okay? We did the same for provinces, and what we said, okay, here, look, there is a little gap, so maybe there is a generational effect. But in fact, it's explained only, mainly, by what happens in the prairie here, right? Okay, it's only some ages, it's not really consistent, but what we can say, and what is interesting, is to say when you do it for provinces, you can have different effects between provinces, and when you make a conclusion for a country, it could be due to one province or one region if you want, okay? That's what I wanted to show you here. But overall, if you look at generation and this indicator, there is no major break, okay? So it's like quite like a line over time. So there is no a huge gap from one cohort to another. And so it was really a preliminary work, the first work that we have done with this data. So I wanted to focus on intergenerational equity for the seminar because it was the issue of this seminar. And so for the moment we can discuss a lot about that, about intergenerational equity, but we didn't find, with respect to our 3 indicators, right? major intergenerational equity break over time in Canada. But what we are really interested in, we want to use this data to make some projection, right? So for example, as Ron did before with his really interesting model. And in fact, population aging is not homogeneous in Canada. You have more old people here in the Atlantic provinces, and Quebec than in other provinces. So you have a really young, provinces here, in particular Alberta, because of petrol, because of oil. Young people are attracted because of this industry. I would just want to assess if there will be an imbalance of transfers to provinces and territories, because there are some transfers related to health, to social transfers, and there is also an equalization transfer to provinces, just to ensure that there is no big inequalities between provinces. So we want to make projection to see what will happen. So that's why when we construct our aggregates, it's really important to have this transfer between provinces for us. And I think that it's a major issue for NTA by province methodology. And that's it. Thank you.
So looking at cross-section age profiles is interesting. Looking at cohort, we can learn even more. And I don't know if you have questions.
Yeah, I think the cohort idea, it's really interesting looking at France and US and Canada, and it just made me think of sort of Easterlin cycles, you know, that did you have a bigger baby boom in two of the countries, and maybe just their sheer size enabled them to sort of get a better deal in terms of, you know, resources relative to other generations, and maybe there wasn't as big a baby boom in Canada. I don't know, just on the list of things to check out at some point. And I would just want to also sort of support your idea that, you know, the future of NTA in some ways is doing these further disaggregations. Those of us who were at the IUSSP population conferences last month, there were a few very prominent people sort of asked, you know, what is the future of population studies and demography, and it was disaggregation.
Okay.
So you're the future.
I mean, you showed that the difference to the US and France, where the consumption of the elderly increases. Did you have a look at which components of consumption this is?
No, I didn't. I really shouldn't. It was really the preliminary result, and I really didn't. In fact, I didn't have the time to look at, just to be really transparent.
Maybe one more question?
Well, just following up on Bernard's question, I couldn't help but wonder whether the difference in the structure of public provision of health care between Canada and the United States had something to do with that growing consumption by the elderly in the US, which is driven a lot by increasing healthcare expenditures on the elderly. And Canada has a single payer, like most of the world, a single payer healthcare system. And I wonder if healthcare expenditures haven't grown as rapidly or at all as a share of GDP.
It's a good question. I don't know. It grew a lot. And when you look at what is really interesting, when you look at the per capita age profile, it remains constant over time. We have the same preference. So it means that population, I think, it explains a lot in the increase of the share. But I don't know if it was as but I know that the share, for example, of healthcare in the GDP increased over time. Yeah.